Islamic philosophy is the systematic investigation of problems connected with life, the universe, ethics, society, and so on as conducted in the Muslim world. Early Islamic philosophy began in the 2nd century AR of the Islamic calendar and lasted until the 6th century AR. The period is known as the Islamic Golden Age, and the achievements of this period had a crucial influence on the development of modern philosophy and science. For Renaissance Europe, the influence represented one of the largest technology transfers in world history. This period began with Al-Kindi in the 9th century and ended with Averroes at the end of 12th century. The death of Averroes effectively marked the end of a particular discipline of Islamic philosophy usually called the peripatetic Arabic school, and philosophical activity declined significantly in Western Islamic countries such as Islamic Spain and North Africa. Philosophy persisted for much longer in the Eastern countries, in particular Persia and India, where several schools of philosophy continued to flourish. Avicennism, illuminationist philosophy, mystical philosophy, and transcendent theosophy. Ibn Khaldun, in his Muqaddimah, made important contributions to the philosophy of history. Interest in Islamic philosophy revived during the Nahda movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and continues to the present day. Introduction. Islamic philosophy refers to philosophy produced in an Islamic society. It is not necessarily concerned with religious issues, nor exclusively produced by Muslims. Nor do all schools of thought within Islam admit the usefulness or legitimacy of philosophical inquiry. Some argue that there is no indication that the limited knowledge and experience of humans can lead to truth. It is also important to observe that, while reason is sometimes recognized as a source of Islamic law, this may have a totally different meaning from reason in philosophy. Islamic philosophy is a generic term that can be defined and used in different ways. In its broadest sense, it means the worldview of Islam, as derived from the Islamic texts concerning the creation of the universe and the will of the Creator. In another sense, it refers to any of the schools of thought that flourished under the Islamic Empire or in the shadow of the Arab Islamic culture and Islamic civilization. In its narrowest sense, it is a translation of falsafa, meaning those particular schools of thought that most reflect the influence of Greek systems of philosophy such as Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism. The historiography of Islamic philosophy is marked by disputes as to how the subjects should be properly interpreted. Some of the key issues involve the comparative importance of Eastern intellectuals such as Ibn Sina and of Western thinkers such as Ibn Rushdi, and also whether Islamic philosophy can be read at face value or should be interpreted in an esoteric fashion. Supporters of the latter thesis, like Leo Strauss, maintain that Islamic philosophers wrote so as to conceal their true meaning in order to avoid religious persecution. But scholars such as Oliver Leaman disagree. Formative influences. Islamic philosophy, as the name implies, refers to philosophical activity within the Islamic milieu. The main sources of classical or early Islamic philosophy are the religion of Islam itself and Greek philosophy, which the early Muslims inherited as a result of conquests, along with pre-Islamic Indian philosophy and Persian philosophy. Many of the early philosophical debates centered around reconciling religion and reason, the latter exemplified by Greek philosophy. Early Islamic philosophy. In early Islamic thought, which refers to philosophy during the Islamic Golden Age, traditionally dated between the 8th and 12th centuries, two main currents may be distinguished. The first is Kalam, which mainly dealt with Islamic theological questions, and the other is Falsafa, which was founded on interpretations of Aristotelianism and Neoplatonism. There were attempts by later philosopher-theologians at harmonizing both trends, notably by Ibn Sina, who founded the school of Avicennism, Ibn Rushdi, who founded the school of Averroism, and others such as Ibn al-Haytham and Abu Rayhan al-Biruni. Kalam ilm al-Kalam is the philosophy that seeks Islamic theological principles through dialectic. In Arabic, the word literally means speech. One of first debates was that between partisans of the Qadar, who affirmed free will, and the Jabarites, who believed in fatalism. At the 2nd century of the Hijra, a new movement arose in the theological school of Basra, Iraq. A pupil, Wazil ibn Atta, was expelled from the school because his answers were contrary to then Sunni tradition and became leader of a new school. He systematized the radical opinions of preceding sects, particularly those of the Qadarites and Jabarites. This new school was called Mu'tazilite. The Mu'tazilites, compelled to defend their principles against the Sunni Islam of their day, looked for support in philosophy, and represent an early attempt to pursue a rational theology in Islam. A later offshoot of this school, known as Ash'arism, aimed to reconcile critical dialectical thinking with a stricter Islamic orthodoxy. The Mu'tazilite and Ash'arite schools are collectively called Mutakallimun, and their type of theology was known as ilm al-kalam. In later times, kalam was used to mean simply theology, i.e., the duties of the heart as opposed to fiqh, the duties of the body. Falsafa is a Greek loanword meaning philosophy. From the 9th century onward, due to Caliph al-Ma'mun and his successor, ancient Greek philosophy was introduced among the Arabs and the peripatetic school began to find able representatives. Another trend, represented by the Brethren of Purity, used Aristotelian language to expound a fundamentally Neoplatonic and Neo-Pythagorean worldview. During the Abbasid Caliphate, a number of thinkers and scientists, some of them heterodox Muslims or non-Muslims, played a role in transmitting Greek, Hindu and other pre-Islamic knowledge to the Christian West. They contributed to making Aristotle known in Christian Europe. 3 speculative thinkers, Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina and Al-Kindi, combined Aristotelianism and Neoplatonism with other ideas introduced through Islam. Some differences between Kalam and Falsafa. Aristotle attempted to demonstrate the unity of God, but from the view which he maintained, that matter was eternal, it followed that God could not be the creator of the world. He did, however, demonstrate, through causal necessity, the existence of a first cause, from which stemmed all of changeable creation, undermining the traditional views of God. Aristotle's divine mind can in fact be a creating principle. According to Aristotelianism, the human soul is simply man's substantial form, the set of properties that make matter into a living human body. This seems to imply that the human soul cannot exist apart from the body. Indeed, Aristotle writes, it is clear that the soul, or at least some parts of it, cannot be separated from the body. And thus, those have the right idea who think that the soul does not exist without the body. In Aristotelianism, at least one psychological force, the active intellect, can exist apart from the body. However, according to many interpretations, the active intellect is a superhuman entity emanating from God and enlightening the human mind, not a part of any individual human soul. Thus, Aristotle's theories seem to deny the immortality of the individual human soul. Wherefore the Mutakallimun had, before anything else, to establish a system of philosophy to demonstrate the creation of matter. To that end, they adopted the theory of atoms as enunciated by Democritus. They taught that atoms possess neither quantity nor extension. Originally atoms were created by God, and are created now as occasion seems to require. Bodies come into existence or die, through the aggregation or the sunderance of these atoms. But this theory did not remove the objections of philosophy to a creation of matter. For, indeed, if it be supposed that God commenced his work at a certain definite time by his will, and for a certain definite object, it must be admitted that he was imperfect before accomplishing his will, or before attaining his object. In order to obviate this difficulty, the Mutakallimun extended their theory of the atoms to time, and claimed that just as space is constituted of atoms and vacuum, time, likewise, is constituted of small indivisible moments. The creation of the world once established, it was an easy matter for them to demonstrate the existence of a creator, and that God is unique. omnipotent, and omniscient. End of the classical period. By the 12th century, Kalam, attacked by both the philosophers and the orthodox, perished for lack of champions. At the same time, however, falsafa came under serious critical scrutiny. The most devastating attack came from al-Ghazali, whose work Tahafut al-Fallacy effectively demolished the main arguments of the peripatetic school. Ibn Rushd, Maimonides' contemporary, was one of the last of the Islamic peripatetics and set out to defend the views of the falsafa against al-Ghazali's criticism. The theories of Ibn Rushd do not differ fundamentally from those of Ibn Bajjah and Ibn Tufayl, who only follow the teachings of Ibn Sina and al-Farabi. Like all Islamic peripatetics, Ibn Rushd admits the hypothesis of the intelligence of the spheres and the hypothesis of universal emanation, through which motion is communicated from place to all parts of the universe as far as the supreme world, hypotheses which, in the mind of the Arabic philosophers, did away with the dualism involved in Aristotle's doctrine of pure energy and eternal matter. But while al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and other Persian and Muslim philosophers hurried, so to speak, over subjects that trenched on traditional beliefs, Ibn Rushd delighted in dwelling upon them with full particularity and stress. Thus he says, not only is matter eternal, but form is potentially inherent in matter, otherwise, it were a creation ex nihilo. According to this theory, therefore, the existence of this world is not only a possibility, as Ibn Sina declared, but also a necessity. Logic. In early Islamic philosophy, logic played an important role. Islamic law placed importance on formulating standards of argument, which gave rise to a novel approach to logic in Kalam. But this approach was later displaced by ideas from Greek philosophy and Hellenistic philosophy with the rise of the Mu'tazili philosophers, who highly valued Aristotle's organon. The works of Hellenistic-influenced Islamic philosophers were crucial in the reception of Aristotelian logic in medieval Europe, along with the commentaries on the organon by Averroes. The works of al-Farabi, Avicenna, al-Ghazali and other Muslim logicians who often criticized and corrected Aristotelian logic and introduced their own forms of logic, also played a central role in the subsequent development of European logic during the Renaissance. According to the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy, for the Islamic philosophers, logic included not only the study of formal patterns of inference and the validity but also elements of the philosophy of language and even of epistemology and metaphysics. Because of territorial disputes with the Arabic grammarians, Islamic philosophers were very interested in working out the relationship between logic and language, and they devoted much discussion to the question of the subject matter and aims of logic in relation to reasoning and speech. In the area of formal logical analysis, they elaborated upon the theory of terms, propositions and syllogisms as formulated in Aristotle's categories, der Interpretationer and prior analytics. In the spirit of Aristotle, they considered the syllogism to be the form to which all rational argumentation could be reduced, and they regarded syllogistic theory as the focal point of logic. Even poetics was considered as a syllogistic art in some fashion by most of the major Islamic Aristotelians. Important developments made by Muslim logicians included the development of Avicennian logic, as a replacement of Aristotelian logic. Avicenna's system of logic was responsible for the introduction of hypothetical syllogism, temporal modal logic and inductive logic. Other important developments in early Islamic philosophy include the development of a strict science of citation, the isnad or backing, and the development of a method to disprove claims, the ijtihad, which was generally applied to many types of questions. Logic in Islamic law and theology. Early forms of analogical reasoning, inductive reasoning and categorical syllogism were introduced in fiqh, sharia and kalam from the 7th century with the process of qiyas, before the Arabic translations of Aristotle's works. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, there was debate among Islamic philosophers, logicians and theologians over whether the term qiyas refers to analogical reasoning, inductive reasoning or categorical syllogism. Some Islamic scholars argued that qiyas refers to inductive reasoning. Ibn Hazm disagreed, arguing that qiyas does not refer to inductive reasoning but to categorical syllogistic reasoning in a real sense and analogical reasoning in a metaphorical sense. On the other hand, al-Ghazali argued that qiyas refers to analogical reasoning in a real sense and categorical syllogism in a metaphorical sense. Other Islamic scholars at the time, however, argued that the term qiyas refers to both analogical reasoning and categorical syllogism in a real sense. Aristotelian Logic. The first original Arabic writings on logic were produced by al-Kindi, who produced a summary on earlier logic up to his time. The first writings on logic with non-Aristotelian elements was produced by al-Farabi, who discussed the topics of future contingents, the number and relation of the categories, the relation between logic and grammar, and non-Aristotelian forms of inference. He is also credited for categorizing logic into two separate groups, the first being idea, and the second being proof. Averroes, author of the most elaborate commentaries on Aristotelian logic, was the last major logician from Al-Andalus. Avicennian logic. Avicenna developed his own system of logic known as Avicennian logic, as an alternative to Aristotelian logic. By the 12th century, Avicennian logic had replaced Aristotelian logic as the dominant system of logic in the Islamic world. The first criticisms of Aristotelian logic were written by Avicenna, who produced independent treatises on logic rather than commentaries. He criticized the logical school of Baghdad for their devotion to Aristotle at the time. He investigated the theory of definition and classification and the quantification of the predicates of categorical propositions, and developed an original theory on temporal modal syllogism. Its premises included modifiers such as at all times, at most times, and at some time. While Avicenna often relied on deductive reasoning in philosophy, he used a different approach in medicine. Ibn Sina contributed inventively to the development of inductive logic, which he used to pioneer the idea of a syndrome. In his medical writings, Avicenna was the first to describe the methods of agreement, difference and concomitant variation which are critical to inductive logic and the scientific method. Ibn Hazm wrote The Scope of Logic, in which he stressed on the importance of sense perception as a source of knowledge. Al-Ghazali had an important influence on the use of logic in theology, making use of Avicennian logic in Kalam. Despite the logical sophistication of Al-Ghazali, the rise of the Ash'ari school in the 12th century slowly suffocated original work on logic in much of the Islamic world. Though logic continued to be studied in some Islamic regions such as Persia and the Levant, Fakhr al-Din al-Razi criticized Aristotle's first figure, and developed a form of inductive logic, foreshadowing the system of inductive logic developed by John Stuart Mill. Systematic refutations of Greek logic were written by the Illuminationist school, founded by Shahab al-Din Suhrawardi, who developed the idea of decisive necessity, an important innovation in the history of logical philosophical speculation, and in favor of inductive reasoning.